At 19, Mira had learned that some people were born into families and others were born into debts, and she was firmly tied to the second category, shackled by the choices of a stepfather who had never once looked at her as a daughter, but always as an object that could be traded, bargained, or blamed. The winter morning she was sold was the coldest she had ever endured. Frost clung to the barn walls, and even the horses exhaled steam like tired, defeated dragons. She stood silently near the corral as men huddled together, negotiating her fate with the same boredom they used to negotiate the price of hay. Her stepfather grinned, as though he had accomplished something great, and the rancher buying her barely looked at her, only eyeing the young stallion tied beside her. "The horse for the girl," her stepfather said, his hand gripping her arm like she was a rope he was tired of holding. The rancher nodded. That was the moment Mira realized a simple truth. She was worth exactly one horse. No more, no less. She felt the world tilt, felt the humiliation punch her in the gut, felt her future shrink into a dark hallway where all the doors had been nailed, shut long ago. She didn't cry, because she had learned a long time ago that tears only gave cruel people something to enjoy. The rancher dragged her along, his grip rough, his breath sour with tobacco, and she followed because she had nowhere else to go, no one to call. No world left outside the ranch she was being traded into like a used tool. The ranch was deep in the wilderness, where the mountains curled like sleeping beasts, their shadows swallowing the land as soon as the sun began to drop. Men worked there, hardened and silent, men who didn't look at her with respect but with a kind of mild curiosity mixed with ownership. The rancher shoved her into a small cabin attached to the barn, saying she would cook, clean, and keep herself useful, and any misbehavior would be met with consequences. Mira nodded numb and sat on the thin cot, staring at her hands, wondering if life would ever give her something more than servitude. For days she worked like a ghost, sweeping dirt floors, chopping firewood in the icy mornings, tending to the horses she adored but was never allowed to ride. She whispered secrets to them, as though they were the only beings in the world who might understand her. She rarely spoke to any man there, but every man noticed her. Whispers followed her like a storm cloud. The horse girl, they called her mockingly, and each time she heard it, she felt the invisible chains tighten around her ribs. Then one evening, just before the sun bled into the mountains, a stranger rode in, tall, broad-shouldered and dusty, his hat pulled low, the kind of cowboy whose presence made the wind pause. His horse was powerful, glossy, a creature that moved like it knew it belonged to a king. The stranger dismounted, and even in the dim light, Mira could tell he wasn't like the others. There was no cruelty in his eyes, just exhaustion, maybe a little sadness. He introduced himself to the rancher as Caleb Hart, a known drifter, cowboy for hire, man with no home but 1,000 miles of open land behind him. The rancher welcomed him, offering him work, which Caleb accepted with a nod. Mira thought he'd be like the rest, uninterested in her existence, but she was wrong. He noticed the small things, the way she flinched when the rancher raised his voice, the way she froze whenever a man walked too close, the way she quietly fed the horses scraps of her own food when she thought no one was watching. Caleb didn't speak to her for 2 days, but he watched, carefully, respectfully, trying to understand something he couldn't yet name. Then on the 3rd morning, he found her chopping wood alone, her thin hands trembling from the cold and exhaustion. "You're bleeding," he said quietly, nodding to the blistering cuts on her palms. She hid her hands behind her skirt instantly. "I'm fine," she muttered. Caleb didn't press, but he offered her his gloves. "You need these more than I do." She refused, shaking her head hard, but he gently placed them on the stump beside her. "If you don't want them, I'll leave them here. If you do, they're yours." She stared at the gloves long after he left, her heart confused by kindness, something she had not received in so long. She could barely recognize it. Days passed, and fate moved slowly but surely, nudging their paths closer. One night, she heard shouting outside her cabin, 2 ranch hands dragging her out, accusing her of dropping a fence rail that led to a calf escaping. She tried to explain she wasn't even near the fence that day, but nobody listened. The rancher slapped her across the face, sending her stumbling into the dirt, and the others laughed as though it were entertainment. Caleb, hearing the commotion from the barn, stormed over. "Enough!" he snapped, grabbing the rancher's arm. The rancher snarled, "Stay out of this. She belongs to the ranch." Caleb's jaw hardened. "She belongs to no one." The rancher shoved him, threatening him with a gun. But Caleb didn't back down. Mira watched, shaking, terrified that he would be hurt because of her. Eventually, the rancher let her go, but he warned Caleb, "You protect her again, you're out." Caleb didn't care. That night, he found Mira sitting behind the barn, hugging herself, eyes puffy but dry. He sat beside her quietly. "You didn't deserve that," he whispered. Mira finally let the truth escape, voice trembling. "I was sold here for a horse." Caleb looked at her as though the world had shifted under his feet. His fists clenched, his eyes darkened, but his voice stayed calm. "You're not property, not now, not ever." Something warm flickered inside her, a small, fragile hope she had buried long ago. Over the next weeks, Caleb became a silent guardian, watching over her from a respectful distance, stepping in whenever the men tried to corner her or assign her. Dangerous tasks meant to break her spirit. Mira tried not to depend on him, but the truth was undeniable. He was the only person who treated her like a human being. One snowy evening, the rancher crossed the final line. He stormed into her cabin, drunk and furious, accusing her of stealing food. Food she had actually given to a starving old horse that could barely stand. Mira backed into the corner, her heart hammering, fear choking her. But before the rancher could touch her, Caleb appeared at the doorway, breathless, eyes blazing. "Step away from her," Caleb growled. The rancher raised his gun. Caleb didn't flinch. "She's coming with me." Mira froze, unable to believe what she was hearing. The rancher laughed. "You can't just take her." Caleb stepped forward slowly, pulled off his coat, and draped it around Mira's trembling shoulders. Then he spoke the words that changed everything. "She's not for sale. She's free." The rancher lunged, the gun going off into the wall, chaos erupting. But Mira didn't see the rest. Caleb grabbed her hand and they ran into the freezing night, snow whipping around them, horses startled, dogs barking, the whole ranch exploding into violence and shouts. They ran until her legs gave out, until the ranch was miles behind them, until the only sound left was the wind whispering through the pines. Caleb stopped, breath steaming in the cold, and looked at her with a mix of fear and determination. Fear that he had no plan, determination that he wasn't letting her go back. "You're free now," he repeated gently. Mira collapsed into his arms, sobbing for the first time in years, because for the first time, someone had saved her, not for what she could do for them, but simply because she deserved to be free. Caleb and Mira reached the old trapper's cabin before dawn, the world around them silent except for the crunch of snow beneath their boots and Mira's trembling breaths as she tried to understand this impossible new reality. Freedom. Inside the cabin, Caleb lit a small fire, its orange glow slowly pushing back the shadows clinging to the room. Mira sat near it, hugging herself as warmth touched her skin like something unfamiliar yet beautiful. Caleb kept glancing at her, as though making sure she was really there, really safe, really free. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said gently. But she shook her head, whispering that the rancher would come for her, that men like him never let go of what they think they own. Caleb knelt beside her, his voice firm, steady as stone. "He doesn't own you. You don't belong to him, or anyone." For the first time, Mira truly looked at him. The dust on his jacket, the exhaustion in his eyes, the quiet strength he carried, like a second skin, and she wondered why a stranger would risk everything for her. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly. Caleb hesitated, then spoke with a truth that cracked something inside her. "Because the world's done enough hurting you. Someone had to stand between you and the next blow." She didn't realize she was crying until he gently handed her a cloth, not wiping her tears for her, but giving her the choice to wipe them herself, a small, powerful act of respect she had never experienced. The days that followed were slow, quiet healing. Caleb hunted, bringing food to the cabin. Mira cooked, still learning what it meant to make choices without fear. Some nights she woke shaking, certain she heard footsteps or the rancher's voice. Each time, Caleb sat beside her until she calmed, never touching her, never forcing words, just letting her know she wasn't alone. As the snow began to melt, Mira started stepping outside, feeling the earth beneath her feet like she was meeting the world. For the first time, one morning as the sun rose over the mountains, she found Caleb saddling his horse. Panic surged in her chest. "Are you leaving me?" Caleb turned, surprised, then smiled gently. "I'm going to the nearest town to file a report. What the rancher did to you is illegal. You deserve protection, not hiding." Mira stared at him, overwhelmed. No one had ever fought for her. No one had ever chosen her without wanting something in return. When Caleb mounted the horse, she grabbed his arm. "Promise you'll come back." He looked down at her, eyes soft. "I already did," he said, and rode off. Hours later, as she waited, heart pounding with a fear she couldn't control, the sound of hoofbeats returned, not angry, not threatening, but steady, warm, familiar. Caleb rode back toward her, dust rising behind him like a trail from another life. "It's done," he said as he dismounted. "You're protected now. No one can claim you again." Mira stepped forward, her voice breaking. "What happens to me now?" Caleb took a slow breath, the mountains glowing gold behind him. "Whatever you choose." She looked at him, at the man who put his coat on her and gave her freedom when the world had priced her as a horse. And for the first time in her life she smiled, not with fear, not with uncertainty, but with a quiet, blooming hope for the future she finally owned.